The conversation that's happening today is where's next? I just want you to put that in a little bit of perspective for us, some context. Where is next? Is that even a conversation worth having?
No, quite frankly, I don't believe it is, because we have so many floating variables at the moment. We've just heard a little while ago that the Scottish Nationalist Party is going to seek likely another referendum on Scottish independence. We've had the resignation of the Prime Minister. We are likely, in my opinion, to see the ouster of the leader of the British Labour Party. We still don't know at what point the UK government is going to launch the Article 50 process to actually leave the European Union. We may very well have an early election in the UK, and we still don't know what the rest of the EU is going to do.
Jacob, should this be negotiated quickly or slowly? The UK, it seems, judging by the political reaction thus far, seems to want to go for the slowly approach. We've already heard from Angela Merkel, we're hearing from François Hollande of France, saying that it needs to be happening quickly. Which one would you side with?
Well, I certainly believe that it should be handled as quickly as possible, because the longer it draws on, uncertainty will weigh on not just the UK economy, but on the entire European economy. And I quite frankly believe that once again, David Cameron has put basically Conservative Party politics over the broader destiny of European integration, which is something that isn't going to endear him very much to the other leaders that he's going to be meeting with in just a few days.
Well, the follow-up to that, actually, the comeback would be for a lot of people, Jacob, that actually he's got a lot of leverage now. He's got a lot of leverage because these guys didn't give him a good enough deal for him to present to the British public to sway the vote his way. Does he not have the leverage now?
No, I don't think he does, because the European leaders have already said that the deal they negotiated with him back in February was final. There's not going to be any renegotiation. That was confirmed again today by the various presidents of the European institutions. Meanwhile, it's the UK economy that is going to be probably taking the biggest hit. And if we're looking at potentially 3 months of uncertainty before the next Conservative convention, then possibly after that a general election in the UK, we could have another 6 months of essentially knowing nothing about where this process is going to end. And that's the amount of uncertainty that I think will have lasting implications for investor confidence and broader levels of investment in the UK economy. So, you know, in some ways, the EU can better economically afford to wait.
Jacob, but it's not about economics, is it? This is all about politics. We have French elections next year and we have German elections next year. The longer this goes on, the more this issue is going to bleed into those domestic stories. Merkel wants it over and done with. Hollande wants it over and done with, because if it's not dealt with, it's going to end up having a meaningful impact on the way that they deal with domestic politics. We've already heard from Le Pen. She's itching to get a referendum taking place in France.
Oh yeah, this is all from the perspective of the other EU leaders, and particularly, as you mentioned, Merkel and Hollande. It's about mitigating the risk of political contagion from this referendum, because they will look at this and they will see that essentially the core simple argument of the Leave campaign that clearly won it for them, which was basically high immigration. It is because of the EU we have high immigration, therefore we need to leave the EU. That's an argument that Marine Le Pen would love to make in France, that Geert Wilders would love to make in the Netherlands, and that many other populists around Europe would love to make. So absolutely, François Hollande and Angela Merkel needs to try to put this genie back in the bottle as soon as possible.
Jacob Kirkegaard, great to have you with us. You are sticking with us. We'll continue this conversation. Of course, you've seen the market reaction. It's dramatic. Stocks dropped the most since the financial crisis here in Europe. Sterling having its worst one-day drop on record. Here's the why. Here's David Gura.
Thanks so much, John. Recapping the big news, a political earthquake in Britain, and the aftershocks are being felt around the world. British voters decided in a referendum to leave the European Union. The Leave campaign won with 52% of the vote, and that sent global markets plunging. The pound fell to its lowest level in 3 decades, and stocks plummeted from London to Tokyo. The vote also means there will be a new leader in the UK. Prime Minister David Cameron led the Remain campaign, and he says he's resigning, and a new prime minister will be in place by October.
The British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction. I will do everything I can as Prime Minister to steady the ship over the coming weeks and months. But I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination.
Cameron has been in office for 6 years. One possible successor, former London Mayor Boris Johnson, one of the leaders of the Leave campaign. Meanwhile, Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel says the EU is strong enough to survive Britain's departure. She'll meet Monday with French President François Hollande and Italy's Prime Minister Matteo Renzi. And Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says Brexit means a second referendum on Scottish independence is now likely. In 2014, voters in Scotland overwhelmingly decided to remain part of the UK. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm David Gura. This is Bloomberg. Guy?
David, thank you very much indeed. What are we going to do next? We're going to carry on the conversation with Jacob Kierkegaard from the Peterson Institute for International Economics. He's a senior fellow over there. European politics, global markets in turmoil. We'll carry on the conversation next. Jacob, for the core periphery debates in Europe. When you look around and you figure out kind of how the central relationship works between France and Germany, there's a lot of things to figure out. But how do you think that the rest of Europe is going to rally round them, if at all? Do you think these two are capable of leading Europe at this point?
I unfortunately think that the sort of scope for leadership that even France and Germany has right now is quite limited. They're not going to be able to respond to this by having, say, another sort of giant leap forward towards integrating in the euro area or the EU as a whole. They're going to have to settle for something much smaller than that. And unfortunately, I think that what they can probably agree on to try to stem this sort of political contagion risk from Brexit is to be very tough on Britain in these coming negotiations, because they want to send a signal to their own voters and voters in other EU countries that if you try to leave the EU, the consequences will be dire indeed.
Jacob, punishing Greece was easy. It was a small economy. You teach them a lesson. You hope that the Spanish and the Italian don't follow suit. Punishing the fifth biggest economy in the world and the second biggest economy in the European Union, isn't that a very different ball game?
Oh, there's no doubt that this will inflict far greater economic costs also on the rest of the Eurozone, which obviously, or the rest of the EU, which runs a major trade surplus right now with the UK. So there'll be economic pain to go around, plenty of that. But it doesn't, unfortunately, in my opinion, matter, because what will trump these economic considerations is this political necessity that particularly France and Germany has to prevent political contagion from Brexit spreading.
There's no economic reform. There's no reform. If you look at what's happening within the centre of Brussels, you look at the Commission, the idea that somehow Europe is going to actually end up in a better place as a result of this is very hard to get to. You wonder how a bureaucracy reforms itself. I'm looking at the European Commission. You wonder how we end up with a banking union in the debate that we're having between France and Germany and the resistance of Germany in all of this. Isn't the danger here that actually the UK goes its own direction, but the EU doesn't reform, and that will ultimately doom it, Jacob?
Oh, I think that there certainly is that risk. And I think even if I'm actually cautiously optimistic that we will get a fully fledged banking union, deposit insurance and all that, that's not the political issue here. I mean, what this vote in the UK shows is that the average person in the UK, and therefore likely also the average person in many other EU countries, feel alienated from the EU, and sort of technocratic, even if necessary, institutional developments like the banking union isn't going to change that. It isn't going to make the EU relevant for the average voter. And I think, unfortunately, the prospects for reform of the EU that is going to make them regain that kind of relevance is very slim indeed.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how some of those elections come through next year. Jacob, thank you very much indeed. Jacob Kierkegaard joining us from the Peterson Institute.
You know, the more we talk about it, the more react. It seems to be that the problems, the obstacles, the headwinds, they're big, if not bigger, over on the continent than perhaps here in the United Kingdom. We'll continue this discussion. Coming up in the next hour, Alan Ruskin, Deutsche Bank's global co-head of FX research, with a big call for cable, 115 by the end of this year. That discussion next.
And bank stocks take a beating.
To our viewers worldwide, a very warm welcome to Bloomberg Go. Special coverage of the referendum right here in the UK with Jonathan Ferro and, of course, Guy Johnson. What a day so far already, Guy.
Market spectacular. Let's run through some of the numbers and get some ideas of exactly what is going on here. We thought that actually the morning reaction would abate a little bit. We have seen some of that, but we're being told by plenty of people that this is going to be a story that runs out over the next few days, not over the next few hours. The FTSE is down, but not as much as we can see on continental markets, John. The banks are taking it and taking it hard, as we can see some of the continental markets, Italian banks, etc., feeling this one pretty nastily this morning. But I think you've also just got to bear in mind that the FTSE is down a little less than some, but you rebase back into dollars,
yeah,
and it's actually underperforming
well,
the rest of the continent.
Check out the FX market reaction. It's been truly stunning. Cable, the biggest one-day drop ever. We trade at 136.59, down by over 8 full percentage points, 30-year lows. Euro Swiss, not as dramatic, because the Swiss National Bank have been confirming they have been intervening in the market to stabilize the Swiss franc. Euro dollar with a 3 percentage point drop, though, Guy. And dollar yen, at one point, dollar yen dropping below 100. Yep. That's significant.
It'll be interesting to find out as well whether the BOJ decided to do anything at that point. Let's take a quick look at what's happening with the bond markets. Look at those moves, folks. Look at what is happening with the British pound. We've already had one guest on, Stephen Saywell, talking about the fact that we could see a 50 basis point cut coming through from the Bank of England, which is backed up by additional QE. That's the market's reaction to that story. But look, we're having a huge market move coming through really across the whole story. That's what's happening with the US 10-year, and that's what's happening with the Bund as well, which has gone negative. The politics in the market's really kind of interacting right now, John. David Cameron really obviously in the eye of the storm. He is going to resign. He hasn't resigned yet. He will be going in 3 months' time after this story out of the UK really puts him flat on his back.
The British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction. I will do everything I can as Prime Minister to steady the ship over the coming weeks.
Different angles from Westminster, London, the Bank of England on Threadneedle Street, and Brussels as well, and on a trading floor right here in the city. We begin with Anna Edwards live from Westminster. Anna, just talk us through the vote. I was talking to an FX guy earlier on, 10 p.m. Things started to change as the hours progressed, and then they progressed dramatically. Just run us through the night's events.
Absolutely, John. It was 52 to 48 in the end, 52% of UK voters voting to leave the European Union, ending 40 years of European Union integration with the UK. Some political commentators talking about this as the biggest political change in Europe since the fall of the Berlin Wall. You're right that things started to develop around midnight time, a couple of hours after the polls closed, when we got some of those first results coming through. And indeed, some of the areas of the northeast of England that people always knew were going to go for leave went even more for leave than had been anticipated, and that's what triggered the alarm bells among FX traders and others around the markets. That's when they knew that Hay had been on the wrong side of this trade. Boris Johnson, he was on the right side. The former mayor of London, he was the one who split from his cabinet colleagues at the top of government here, and he was rather on the fringe of the cabinet, but he was involved in the governing party, and he split from them, leading this leave charge. He's been talking today about not pulling up the drawbridge. Interesting to see whether he becomes the next leader of the Conservative Party, or whether there are other contenders, and other names are already being thrown around. Guy, John?
Anna Edwards from Westminster, thank you very much. Guy, the FX market, there was a consensus. We knew there was potential for a huge gap lower. We just built up to a position where we didn't think it was going to happen.
Yeah.
The whole of the FX market, there was a big consensus there. They just did not think it was going to happen.
And as a result of which, the move that we've seen today, even larger. It's interesting to look at the move on the week, though.
Yes,
Let's go
is.
to Matt Miller now. He's joining us from the Aberdeen Assets Management trading floor. Matt, we've already seen the reaction, obviously, into a number of assets. Are the guys behind you looking for opportunities now, or are they still playing defense?
Well, the guys behind me here at Aberdeen are much longer-term investors focused on individual areas and benchmarked to those indexes. So you don't see the heck